Welcome, everyone. My name is Madeline No, and I'm from NetHope. We want to welcome you today to another webinar in our NetHope Solution Center webinar series. Today, our topic is an introduction to impact management for international NGOs. And today we're welcoming NetHope member organization, Plan International, as well as NetHope partner, Salesforce.org. And before we get started today, I would like to go over a few, housekeeping guidelines for our session today. Let's try to keep this interactive. Please post your questions and comments in the Zoom chat window for our Q&A discussion toward the end of the session today. Also, after the session is over and later today, please look for a follow-up email that will include a link to the recording and the collateral for today's session. Also, we have a webinar satisfaction poll that we appreciate if you would complete at the end of the session today. Your feedback is very important to us, so please take a few minutes to complete that survey. And with that, I will hand it off to Andrew Means from Salesforce.org to kick off our presentation.
Thank you so much. And I do want to begin by saying thank you for having us for today's webinar, and thank you to all of you who are joining us today. I think impact management is such an important topic. I'm really excited to talk to all of you about it. And it always just makes me excited to dive into people that are interested in how we can better create change in the world. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And as a quick welcome from us, I just want to say, my goal for our time together today is to help you, better understand what we at Salesforce are thinking about impact management, how we help customers, and to learn from Plan International on the great work that they're doing to build out their own impact management capacities and capabilities. Some quick introductions, just so you know who's talking with you today. My name again is Andrew Means. I'm the Senior Director of Global Impact Data Strategy here at Salesforce.org. I've spent my entire career, the last over 10, almost 12 years, working in and with nonprofits on how to use data and technology to move their mission forward. So I've worked with large organizations, many NGOs and multilaterals, as well as smaller local organizations all over the world, trying to figure out how we can make a better impact in the world. And we've got a great lineup of folks here today. And so Eric, I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Dorella, Salesforce.org's Director of Measurement and Evaluation. I've been with Salesforce.org for a little over 6 years now, and I have nearly 20 years of experience conducting evaluations, primarily with a utilization focus. And so prior to joining Salesforce.org, I worked as an internal evaluator in education, both in US urban school districts and with education-focused nonprofits. I'm currently on the editorial advisory board of the American Journal of Evaluation and just finished a 3-year stint on the board of directors of the American Evaluation Association.
Hi, I'm Rakesh Barania. I'm the Humanitarian Impact Data Director at Salesforce.org. I have been in the humanitarian and international development space for about 26 years now, and I've been a part of the NetHope community for the last 14 years, working around the world in both international development as well as international crisis response contexts. I've worked with many of you here on NetHope's emergency response activities throughout the years, and within Salesforce, I lead our strategy for engaging with the humanitarian and international development community, how we can apply our technologies to your context, and how we deliver better impact collectively together. Over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, and I'm Jackie Galanetti. I'm Director of Monitoring, Evaluation, Research and Learning at Plan International, and we've been working with Salesforce and some of the apps on their platform over the last few years in our journey to be able to manage our impact as an organization better. Thanks.
Awesome. And for this morning's or this evening's, depending on where you are, agenda, we're just going to go over kind of 4 main things. We're going to go over some core definitions, because I think this is an area where sometimes we use the same language, but we mean slightly different things. So we're going to talk about what we mean by impact and impact management. talk about how Salesforce.org is approaching impact management. You'll hear from Jackie to share the great work that Plan International is doing and how they're leading on monitoring and evaluation. And then we'll be opening up for questions. And we really do hope that you interact with us as we go along. Feel free to send in your questions throughout the session, and we'll be trying to address as many of those as we can. But I always like to begin with this idea of like a core why, which is why does the nonprofit sector exist? And for me, it comes back to this idea that there's something about the world as it exists today that we want to see changed or preserved for tomorrow. And that the world has this kind of natural trajectory that it's on, and we want to bend that trajectory more towards justice, more towards sustainability, more towards equity. There's things about the world that we want to see changed or preserved, and that's fundamentally why we exist. And I think that concept really starts to capture the idea of impact. And I think impact is really this idea of the change in the world because an organization exists. The way I like to think about this is imagine a world where your organization exists and one where it doesn't exist. And everything else about those two worlds is exactly the same, except that your organization exists. The difference between those two worlds is your organization's impact. And what I like about this definition is that it starts to capture this idea of total or summative impact. Our impact can be positive, it can be negative, it can be intended, and it can be unintended. And it's this kind of total idea of change. Now, of course, we don't, we can't go to other multiverses and figure out what the difference is in all these different places. And so we've developed lots and lots of different kinds of tools and methods to get a sense of what the impact that our organizations are creating actually is. But as we think about impact, I think it's important to kind of hold in the back of your mind this idea that it's the change in the world that exists because your organization exists, the change in the world that happens because your organization exists. Now, we use a lot of different kind of language around impact as well. We talk about outputs and outcomes and impact, and I think it's important to start to differentiate between these different things. And the way I like to think about this is imagine that I'm a coach and I'm training people to run their first 5K race. There's a few different questions that I might be asking myself. The first question is simply, how many people did I get to run the race? How many people came to the Andrew Means Couch to 5K training program, right? And that's not my impact, but certainly if that number was low, it would limit the amount of impact that I could have, right? It's an important piece of information as I begin to understand and interpret my impact story. Now, the second question I might ask is how many people in the Andrew Means Couch to 5K program actually finished the race, right? Because my goal in being their coach was to get them across the finish line of their first 5K race. Well, these are really the outcomes that I created, right? Like, these are the people that achieved the thing that I set out to do, right? Like, again, if you hold this concept of there's something about the world as it exists today that we want to see changed for tomorrow, this idea of finish lines is important. What is it that we are trying to do? And it could be educating young people. It could be in decreasing the prevalence of certain diseases. It could be any number of things. So there is some sort of change in the world that we are trying to observe. And oftentimes we're interested in how many people are displaying that change, achieved that kind of change. But those are really the outcomes that I'm interested in. If I think about my impact, what I'm really curious about is how many people finished this race that would not have otherwise. If it weren't for the Andrew Means Couch to 5K program, they would never have crossed the finish line. That concept is the closest kind of question to understanding my impact. Now, impact is very hard, right? It's very hard to get a sense of this counterfactual, what would have happened otherwise. But there's a reason why most organizations tend to focus on reporting outputs and outcomes. And I don't want to diminish the importance of outputs and outcomes. We absolutely should be collecting and managing and reporting our outputs and outcomes, but it's because we can observe our outputs and outcomes. Like, they're the things that we can see. We can count how many people ran the race. We can count how many people finished across the finish line, but we have to estimate how many people crossed the finish line that wouldn't have otherwise. We use different statistical and computational and social science methodologies to estimate that amount. But this is just to lay a foundation for kind of this continuum from output to impact. And as we go throughout today's conversation, we'll be talking about impact, we'll be talking about outcomes. And I think, this is not to diminish, again, the importance of outputs or outcomes, but just to start to differentiate slightly in our language. Now, we at Salesforce believe that every INGO should be able to manage their impact. And I love this word manage. I think this word manage is so very important because we don't think that you should just be able to measure or report your impact. We actually think that there are things that you should be able to do today that can influence and affect the amount of impact that your organization has. We believe that every organization can get better at creating impact with the resources that it has today. Now, there's lots of different things that we think organizations should be able to do when it comes to managing their impact, but I want to talk about 3 of them today. The first is this idea of being able to identify what change that you are working towards. We think every INGO should be able to identify what's the change or changes in the world that your organization is working towards. Why are you doing the programming that you're doing? What is the change that you're hoping to create? The second thing is around having confidence about where you're offering what programs and to whom. Especially as INGOs, we hear this challenge again and again that if you ask, even 10 or 15 people in the leadership of the organization, how many people do you reach? Where are you offering programs? What programs are you offering? You might get very different answers. And so creating kind of this single source of truth around what you're offering, where and to whom is critical in being able to manage your impact. Because a big part of impact management is about where you are assigning resources and where you're putting interventions. And are you making sure that you're aligning, the resources that you have and the interventions that you run to places that need them the most? And then lastly, we're going to talk about having insight into the outcomes and impacts that your programs are driving. We think when your executive team sits down and your board of directors meets, that when they pull up their operational KPIs and their financial reports, they should be able to just with as much confidence and access be able to see the outcomes and impacts that your programs are creating. Because the financial reports and the operational KPIs are in service of your impact. Again, our organizations exist to create change in the world. And so we operate our programs and we use our resources to create change in the world. If we aren't thinking about that kind of change and thinking about how our financial decisions and our operational decisions affect that kind of those outcomes and that impact, I think we're missing the greatest opportunity to improve the amount of impact that we have in the world. And as we all know, there's much change that we want to see in the world in a limited amount of resources with which to do it. Now, why is this important today? And why are we talking about this today? I think the reason is that I see an emerging paradigm across the sector. I think for the longest period of time of the nonprofit sector, what happened was we would raise money or raise resources, volunteers, things like that. We'd operate these kind of programs, and hopefully some sort of impact was created in the world. And we might report back to our donors and our funders about how we spent their money, basically trying to prove to them that we didn't run away with their money and buy a boat or a vacation home or something like that, and that we used their money to create this impact. But it was kind of a one-way process, right? We would go out and we would raise money, we would spend that money, and we would create impact in the world. I think what we're seeing today is that as the sector becomes more impact-driven, more data-driven, that the impact that your organization creates actually will act as a pull towards additional resources. That as your organization is creating impact in the world, that it's going to essentially sell that impact to its donors, and that the organizations that have greater evidence of the impact that they're creating are going to be the ones that are able to attract greater and greater resources going forward. And so I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Rakesh to talk some about how particular sectoral reforms are moving the INGO space closer and closer to impact management.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. Yes, I mean, as many of you may recall, the entire sector, both on the humanitarian and development side, as well as the environmental side, have been working on this journey for many years and going back as far back as the 90s to really professionalize and become more focused around impact. Now, in recent years, there have been a number of reform efforts that have come together that really are putting data and evidence at the center of humanitarian and development action. So coming out of the World Humanitarian Summit back in 2016, there was an initiative called the Grand Bargain. And the Grand Bargain, we'll talk about that more in a moment here, but it includes 61 signatories. It was a major reform effort that says that both the donors and the NGO recipients of donor funding have committed to this. Based on the SDGs and the reforms that came out of the World Humanitarian Summit, the sector itself is looking towards a more measurable, evidence-based focus on sustainable and durable outcomes. The key thing here is that the largest donors and the largest international NGOs have already collectively signed on to this vision. We've seen this with things like the Triple Nexus, which is bringing together the traditionally siloed mission areas of humanitarian action, development, primarily represented by the SDGs, and also peace building. Organizations like DFID, or now FCDO, and USAID, again, major donors, have come around saying, hey, as part of our grant making process, we want to have more focus on measurable and evidence-based outcomes. And so what I'd like to do is double click on two major reform efforts just to give you a flavor of what's going on in the sector. Next slide, please. The Grand Bargain is a major initiative in the humanitarian sector. Many of your organizations are participants in Grand Bargain related reforms. Again, coming out of the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, the goal was to really improve the effectiveness and efficiency of humanitarian action. And humanitarian action, in this case, we're defining this as emergency crisis response to a disaster or a conflict situation or some other circumstance where people's basic human needs are in immediate jeopardy. Now, the Grand Bargain signatories represent the vast majority of all humanitarian contributions from donors and the majority of all humanitarian aid. Again, 84% of all donor commitments and 69% of all total humanitarian aid. And it includes the major state donors like the UK and the US and the EU. It involves many of the major UN agencies that are involved in the cluster system. It involves many of the largest international NGOs who are NetHope members, as well as the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. So across the board, this is a pretty substantial reform effort. Now, there are 9 work streams in the Grand Bargain, and impact management has a relevance to all of them. Next slide, please. But even within sectors in the development side, you're seeing impact management reforms. So within the child protection and child development part of our sector, there is an initiative called the Joining Forces Initiative, which was started in 2019. And the goal of the Joining Forces Initiative was to really build on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, right? So the CRC came out, it was a transformative moment for child protection and child development. And yet after 30 years of CRC, we can see where progress still needs to be made. And the idea here is that 6 child development NGOs got together and said, collectively, we have work to do and we want to advocate and move forward on our collective impact around children. And so impact management is going to be a key enabler of many of these workstream elements in the JFI. Next slide, please. So impact management is this idea of continuously improving programs for greater impact. So you have your program management, so you actively manage your programs today. You are measuring so you can improve the impact you'll have tomorrow, and then you learn by what you did yesterday. Now, we created a white paper on it's available on the salesforce.org website around Achieving Agenda 2030, which specifically talks to what does impact management look like for the international humanitarian and development community and for the organizations focused on those missions. This is a set of practices and capabilities. Impact management, again, practices and capabilities, those two words are really important here because these are things you do culturally. These are things you have resourced within your organization so that you are offering today to improve tomorrow's impact by learning what we've done in the past. Next slide, please. So what are these capabilities? Well, there's 4 basic ones. We want to get into a habit of continuous evidence building. We're not doing one study at a time. We're not doing a start and stop process around measurement and evaluation. But the idea is that we are always building evidence continually. We have strategic evidence plans. We are using logic model development and utilization in how we actually deliver our programs. And we're actively using analytics day in and day out at every level of our mission. We have integrated financial management. In other words, the funding, we are using impact and our evidence and data to really make financial decisions. Where should we be investing more? Where should we be investing less? How do we finance based on outcomes? The next capability is participant-centered program management. And I know that this is something that a lot of us talk about a lot. We put the beneficiaries at the center, but we need to really make sure that we are truly doing this within our sector. And that means that, are we collecting data effectively in the moments and places where the work is getting done? Do we have the appropriate feedback tools? Are we getting the voice of the constituencies, our participants and their communities into our program? And that individual case officers on the ground in the moments and places where that work is getting done, that they have the information they need to have in order to make sure that they are delivering the best support and services to the participants in the program. And all of these 3 things are grounded in fundamentally an ethical and responsible approach to evidence and data. And so that's not just including, security and privacy, which tech companies often talk about, but it also incorporates and allows for the inherent power disparities that exist in humanitarian development action. And that's, between headquarters and field, that's between the NGO and the participant. It includes things like safeguarding, and it includes protections for civil liberties and human rights. Next slide, please. Andrew, why don't you tell us about the journey?
Absolutely. We really recognize that impact management is not a one and done kind of thing. It really is about continuously improving your program, building these practices and capabilities within your organization. And we recognize that there's somewhat of a journey that goes along here. And we typically begin this journey with our customers through what we call an impact management consultation. And I'm really excited to be able to say that for any of the NetHope members on today's call, you're happy to reach out to me. My email will be on at the end of this presentation, and we'll set up one of these consultations with you and your organization. But we work with a program or we work with an organization to talk about what they're trying to accomplish in the world, and assess where they are. And that brings us into this kind of impact management assessment, this maturity assessment, trying to understand where you are and where you want to go and what the path might be to get there. And we also engage with customers in creating what we call strategic evidence plans, which are trying to bring together this idea of what is it that you're trying to change in the world? What are the questions that you're trying to answer as you run your programs? What's the data that you need to do that? And then how might technology support and undergird that work? And then we see this kind of begins to branch off into different directions. But you have a lot of organizations trying to answer this question of what are we doing, where, and to whom. We work to develop out like a program catalog or inventory and be able to map that to where your organization is working. And then from there, being able to build out a dashboard that do track and monitor the outputs that your organization's having, the impact that it's having at both a programmatic and organizational level. And at this point, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Eric, to talk about how we start to live this out at Salesforce.org. We don't just want to be an organization that is telling others that they need to be managing their impact while we're not managing and thinking about our own. So my colleague Eric's going to talk a little bit about our own impact management efforts here at Salesforce.org.
Great, thanks, Andrew. I want to take a few minutes to share how we approach impact management at Salesforce.org. Just like our customers and our peers, we're on a journey with respect to our own M&E and impact measurement. And as Andrew just said, I think it would be a travesty if we were the do as we say, not as we do organization. We really want to be as transparent as possible about our own journey. So I wanted to call attention to this previous slide. My work really fits squarely into our impact management model and overlaps with the monitoring and evaluation and impact measurement components. I really see the M&E work at Salesforce.org as focusing on learning from what we did yesterday and setting up measurement processes that will lead us to improve the impact we want to have tomorrow. Next slide. So why do I want to make sure Salesforce.org has an effective M&E system? It's because knowledge is power. We need the appropriate data to tell us about what works and what doesn't work so well, our current impact and how we can improve it, and how we can weave in our findings into future organization strategy. However, just because we have the data we want doesn't mean our impact will automatically improve. There's another step that comes before we can see changes. Next slide. So just because our impact data are useful doesn't mean that our impact data will be used. And I say this at least once a week to anybody who will listen. Right now, my cat has heard this a lot, but there's a wide chasm between useful and used. I could create the perfect evaluation report, one that will immediately lead to us maximizing our organizational impact. However, if nobody reads it and acts upon it, what's the point? It'll just collect dust like so many other evaluation reports. So in addition to working to make sure we have appropriate impact data, I'm also working with Salesforce.org to ensure that we're learning from the data too. Utilization is really where the rubber meets the road regarding effective M&E. Next slide. So for starters, we have what I think is a great theory of change that guides our work. It includes our main pillars of work: technology, partnership, community, as well as social sector system strategies and our impact statements. However, I'm an evaluator, from way back. And so while this format's useful for me, it's not necessarily useful for the rest of Salesforce.org. Next slide. So this is why my team has also created an easier to understand theory of change document. It's still focused on our main pillars of work and our impact statements, but it translates the directionality of the previous slide into an if-then statement that's easier to follow. We've been told this is easier to follow than the one on the previous slide. And so this slide is much more likely to be understood and internalized. If my colleagues find our theory of change to be meaningful, they find something that resonates for their work, they're more likely to align their work to our theory of change. Next slide. And so that theory of change is really the groundwork for our logic model. All of our work is theoretically aligned to it. You can see our inputs, our activities grouped by pillar of work, our outcomes, and our intended impact. I'll share what some of the outputs are in a little bit, but I want to call attention to the outcomes column. Something new we've done is categorize outcomes by stakeholder groups. So while Salesforce.org and our customers, employees, and partners are working toward our shared goal of closing the impact gap, they work toward it in different ways. So we now focus our outcome measurement at the stakeholder level. So we've also created logic models for each stakeholder group, which align to this principal one. Next slide. So we also engage in quantitative and qualitative data collection to be able to better understand the what, how, and why of our customers' impact. Our customer outcome survey goes out to all eligible Salesforce.org customers near their anniversary dates. So we have data on what our customers are doing with our technology all year long. We interview a representative sample of our customers about how and why they're engaging with the platform at the beginning of the year. Actually, the cycle starts tomorrow, so I'm excited. We do both of these because we want to be as accurate as possible when telling our impact story. Quantitative data will only get us so far. We need qualitative data to help us better understand what we're seeing in the survey. Next slide. And so every year we create artifacts for both our internal and our external stakeholders. Our big external document is the Salesforce.org Community Impact Report. It was formerly called our Social Impact Report, and this is released every September. In it, we share our outcomes-focused analyses related to our technology, partnerships, and community work. However, we have quite a bit more data than what makes it into the report, which usually is always the way. My team also creates deep dive data decks for internal stakeholders that provide detailed analyses of our data tailored for specific teams. And the goal of these decks is to provide our colleagues with timely and relevant data for use in decision making. Again, that focus on useful versus used. So where are the outputs that we're missing from that logic model? I said I'd be addressing them, and here's where I'm doing it. Our teams are working on a great many outputs. However, we can't have them all represented on the slide. I do not want to read a logic model with the font that small. So what we've done is we've taken the most important outputs and built what we're calling an Impact Accountability Performance Matrix, or Impact APM. And Salesforce.org is actively working to manage both its financial and non-financial performance in an aligned manner. The Impact APM will allow us to do just that. So in my version of an aligned M&E system, key performance indicators, or KPIs, should be aligned to the outputs in a logic model. The Impact APM takes the most important non-financial KPIs, which are aligned to our impact framework, and couples them with our financial KPIs. And again, the goal is for increased alignment to impact. Next slide. So I believe this is the third time in this presentation that I'm going to say it, but there is a wide chasm between useful and used. As my team works to maintain and socialize our M&E system and ensure impact data utilization, we've begun to employ a few strategies. The first is consistent reporting. Only relevant and timely data will be used for effective impact measurement. So we report on our data monthly, quarterly, and annually, so it's available when needed. In addition to providing deep dive decks, we also facilitate conversations about data use throughout Salesforce.org. And while my team would love to help all Salesforce teams build logic models and manage their impact data, we are a team of two and cannot be everywhere at once. Trust me, we've tried. So we also play the role of trusted advisor by providing some hands-on support and toolkits for our colleagues as they work to make sense of their impact data. In addition, we're working on democratizing our impact data through the use of AMP Impact, an impact measurement package developed by Vera Solutions, one of our international partners. The use of AMP Impact will help us provide real-time reporting that can be accessed by anyone in the organization. Next slide. So as I said at the beginning of my part of this presentation, Salesforce.org is on its own impact journey, and we've come a long way, and we have a long way to go. We've implemented processes and created products that map onto all three of our impact management capabilities. But we have more work to do because we have great frameworks to guide our work, and I'm excited to see us grow in our impact measurement and management maturity. So speaking of impact management maturity, I have the pleasure of turning over the presentation to Jackie, who will share what's going on at Plan International.
Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. For those of you who are not aware, Plan International is a development and humanitarian organization that advances children's rights and equality for girls. We strive for a just world, working together with children, young people, our supporters and partners, and we support their rights from when they are born to when they reach adulthood and as they move into young adulthood. Impact is critical to our work as it demonstrates the positive changes and results of our program and influencing work, which can be established by demonstrating a plausible connection between those changes and our interventions with children and the communities in which they live. Impact evidence also grounds us for the future. Its nature allows us to be an organization where the quality of our work is informed by credible evidence, where we learn from both our successes and mistakes in what we do and how we deliver our programs and advocacy, and where the evidence and learning is put to good use to improve what we do. Now, I just want to pause and take a moment to differentiate between impact management and the measurement of impact. The latter specifically aims to determine causal relationships between changes and interventions. Final project evaluations and plan tend to not ordinarily entail impact evaluation methodologies. And this is for various reasons. Firstly, cost and time. Often costs a lot of money and requires multi-year assessments to do impact evaluations. Also, the nature of the project, you usually reserve these types of measurement for experimental program design. Impact evaluations are extremely complex and take an inordinate amount of planning and stringency of delivery. And then finally, obviously, there is the ongoing debate relating to the ethics of RCTs and the like. So this is not something we ordinarily do as an organization, but we do them. But there is a lot that needs to happen before that takes place. Rather, I would like to discuss how we have and are approaching impact management in our ordinary day-to-day work. Our global strategy sets out an ambition for the organization. And if we could move to the next slide. Together, we take action so that 100 million girls learn, lead, decide, and thrive. And there are certain key enablers that will help us as an organization make this a reality. One of these enablers is the utilization of cutting-edge research and evaluations to guide excellent programming and credible influencing. This is important from an impact perspective because recognizing we as an organization had strengths and weaknesses based on a situation analysis of the state of monitoring and evaluation at the time, an M&E strengthening project was designed to improve how we do monitoring and evaluation in order to show the impact of our work in our countries and at a global level. This project was oriented towards improving accountabilities across the organization, to program and influence participants and donors, and to producing evidence and information relating to the effect plan is making in the lives of children and youth, particularly girls. Essentially, the project looks to improve how we manage our impact through three main components. The first is developing global monitoring and evaluation results frameworks for our strategic thematic priorities, essentially the what plans, monitoring, evaluation, and learning seeks to serve. The second is strengthening our monitoring and evaluation approaches. The how monitoring and evaluation and learning works in plan, including capacity building and upskilling of our staff. And the final component is an M&E system. And for us, this consists of a suite of digital applications and tools that will provide for the collection, recording, aggregation, and analysis of data. Next slide, please. We designed the system to be the most relevant, closest to where the data is sourced at our country office and community level. This is key for accountability and will allow our country offices to optimally use and learn from our monitoring and evaluation data. In time, The M&E system will provide us with project and program results disaggregated by sex and age. And these results will sit at the output, outcome, and impact level according to the scope of the project. They will be calculated against set targets and mapped to programs' thematic focus areas, humanitarian, gender, and advocacy indicators. Importantly, they will also be aggregatable at program, country office, regional, and global levels in order to show progress against our strategic results. And in time, these will also be linked to project finances, spend, and performance, as well as our organizational gender marker. And so we will be able to create dashboards for country office management, global program management, so that we can track and monitor and report on accountability at all levels. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jackie, for sharing what Plan International is doing to really put impact at the center and to evaluate its effectiveness so rigorously. I do want to just talk about a couple opportunities that are coming up before we open it up for our Q&A. The first is, if you're interested in this idea of impact management, as I said, available to any NetHope members is a complimentary impact management consultation with myself or Tesh, other members of our team. Simply reach out to me at ameans@salesforce.com, and we'd love to work with you on getting something scheduled with your organization. The second is the Salesforce Nonprofit Summit is coming up on April 21st. This is a great opportunity to hear from other amazing organizations all over the world who are using data and technology to further their impact in their mission. The summit, you can check out the summit if you just Google Salesforce Nonprofit Summit. Also, if you're interested in being one of these amazing organizations that's just sharing how you are leveraging data and technology for impact, you can submit a session. The bad news is that the submission deadline is tomorrow. So if you're interested in speaking at the Nonprofit Summit, and be sure to do that as soon as possible, as the deadline is tomorrow. But I want to say thank you so much again for joining us as we open up for Q&A. Rakesh, I believe you have the questions for us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And first of all, thank you everybody for submitting all your questions here. What I'd like to do now is go ahead and start handing out some of the questions to our panelists here that you've been submitting, and we will be continuing to take questions. So if you come up with any new questions while we're all talking up here, then please go ahead and pop those into the chat window, and we'll field as many of those as we possibly can in the time that we have remaining. And I would like to, send the first question over to Jackie here. There was a question that came in that says, how do you balance setting global logic models and indicators for the thematic areas, adapting to local realities and empowering local staff to define those local needs and local results? So it sounds like there's that tension between the headquarters and the field, and how do we empower people at the local level?
Absolutely. I was just typing as you asked me that. So absolutely, that's so key. What we have tried to do is to create certain core global indicators, which we have said link to what is critical from a programming perspective that our projects need to do in order for them to be quality projects. So let me give you an example. In relation to ECD, so early childhood development, our approach is that if we are doing any early childhood development program or project, for it to be really successful, there is a core component in that program or project which has to be around positive parenting. And any ECD project will not be of sufficient quality for us if it doesn't have that positive parenting component. So for us, that's a core component of any ECD project. There can be other contextual, relevant, local add-ons and interventions linked to that program or project. But for us, we want to see that there is an intervention that really does promote positive parenting. And so we've built up a core set of result statements around those core elements of programs and a set of core indicators, which we're making available in an indicator bank in the system, so that when you are working on a particular project in a country office, they can choose the result statement and the core indicators. Obviously, they can be tweaked to local context. You know, for example, if you're talking about a midwifery, the UK is not the same as, and I'm going to pronounce it horribly, Bangarais in the Philippines. I've probably butchered that, so apologies for that. And then obviously when you're building your results framework and log frame at the local level, all your local context and local indicators can be built into that. So hopefully I've explained that correctly. Thanks.
Thanks so much. We have Eric, next one's going to be up for you here. The question came in, as a for-profit technology company, how do we marry or merge or think about the impact of our commercial penetration of the nonprofit community versus Salesforce's own role in changing the world through our customers? How do we strike that balance as a tech company doing M&E?
Yeah, when I saw that question come in, I started to do some thinking, because I think for us, when we set up this framework, we were Salesforce.org, the nonprofit. And so we've had to spend the last year and a half really figuring out, well, how does this still fit in with us now being a business unit within Salesforce? And I think what we're finding is that it still very much fits. And I think one of the main ways that we're trying to marry those two, thinking about our kind of role as a business unit and our role as a mission-focused, mission-aligned organization, is that we're not going to be able to escape growth, but that's okay, because we're operating on the assumption that growth is one of our drivers for impact. So if we're able to grow, then we have more resources available to provide to the social sector, which in turn should give us more growth, and we can provide even more resources. And so for us, it's not that growth and impact are adversaries. It's more that growth is a driver for us of what we actually can do. Yeah, it really is, as Jackie just wrote, it is, a marriage between systems and business processes. That really, I saw that, I was like, yeah, that works for us too. Yeah, and so we really want to make sure that we are pursuing impact in all areas of the business. That it's not just for program, it really is for all.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Kate, for the question. Jackie, I'm going to come back over to you. Kyra asked, thank you, Jacqueline. This was very interesting. What type of digital tools do you use at Plan to collect the data? And then are these tools then linked to a Salesforce dashboard?
Hi, thanks. Yes. So we use a range of digital tools at the moment. We used to have a global license for PoiMapper. We're in the process of retiring that and replacing that with TarotWorks, which links directly into Salesforce. And that has various advantages. Having impact sitting on the Salesforce platform and having a digital data collection tool also sitting on Salesforce is, for various reasons, and I'm not a techie person, but for various reasons is of benefit. But we recognize that our country offices might use other tools. So there has to be the possibility of them using either manual, if they still need to, or other digital tools. We just have to have a different process for getting that data then into the system. So, you know, it really is this marriage between the system and the business processes and how the two work together. You can't, they have to be in sync, otherwise it's just not going to work. Thanks.
Thanks, Jackie, and thanks, Kyra, for the question. Andrew, this next question will be up for you here. You know, most organizations are occupied with scrambling to meet donor reporting requirements and needs regarding impact. Do you have any recommendations as to how to develop an ethical and responsible approach to evidence and data?
Absolutely. I think when it comes to donor requirement, one, I absolutely feel the weight of so many organizations that do have to manage, you know, different reporting requirements to different funders and things of that nature. And we are, you know, trying to further conversations with the donor community to try and align around some reporting standards. But when it comes to the ethical and responsible use of this information, I think one of the things that really comes to mind there is the thought of that we're extracting data from those that we serve without creating value for them out of that information. And we're doing it purely to kind of get funds from our donor community. And so I think when I've worked with organizations, what I think is really beneficial is if you are collecting information, try to do it as efficiently and effectively as possible, reducing duplication of information, reducing the burdens that we put on those that we serve to give us information and maybe give 5 or 10 other organizations the same information if they're receiving services from them as well. And I think we need to make sure that we are doing our best to collect that information as efficiently and effectively as possible. And then the second big thing is that we are protecting that information. I think that we should never collect information that increases the vulnerability of those that we serve. Like, even if it would help us prove our impact, even if it would help us tell the story of our impact, if it is putting at risk those that we serve, we have to be cognizant of that, and we must never increase the vulnerability of those that we serve through our data collection practices. And we should be able to protect the information that we do collect. Many of you are serving populations that others might want information about, for example. And so you need to be able to ensure that you have the practices and the infrastructure in place to protect the information that you are collecting. So I think when it comes to the ethical use and of reporting this information back to donors and using this information, we have to make sure that we're not increasing burdens to those that we're serving, that we're using the information to better serve them and give the information back to them in ways that helps them to improve their own lives, that we are never increasing the vulnerability of those that we serve through our data collection practices, and that we do keep all of the information that we collect very secure.
Thanks so much, Andrew, and thanks, Jamila, for the question. One comment I would just throw into there is that almost 2 years ago now, Salesforce.org created the Impacting Responsibly report, which talks about some of these ethical use constraints around impact and impact measurement. So if you go out onto the Google and search for Impacting Responsibly and Salesforce, you'll find that document out there, and that's another reference around this question. Jackie, I'm going to come back to you here for our next question. I'm just doing a quick time check. How does Plan International go about setting global impact targets? And thank you, Eric, for the question.
I mean, if we're looking at sort of the outcomes that we're looking to contribute to, we very much in our global strategy linked those to what we see as our contribution to the 2030 SDGs. So what we effectively are looking to do is to trace through our M&E work how we do our work and how that contributes to the SDGs. And we do that through thematic outcomes, but we also link our targets to our annual reporting and how we count and measure our various outputs in relation to the work that we do every year. So there's a whole range of methods that we use to do our annual reporting, both from a project participant perspective, direct and indirect project participants. Sorry, we are no longer using the term beneficiary. We're trying to now refer to project participants, but it's taken a while to do the brain shift. But also through contribution analysis in relation to particularly our influencing and our advocacy and policy work. So yeah, I'm not sure I answered that very well, but there's a range of different layers to setting those global targets based on our experiences, one, but also based on the external goals that are out there too. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Eric, for the question. Eric, I'm going to give you the last question here, and actually several people asked this question. So the questions came in from Yasir and Alan, and it was basically the same thing, which is how do we estimate our impact and how do we establish counterfactuals?
Yeah, I saw those questions earlier, and then there's also a question from Lauren around kind of measuring impact about that may well be beyond the sphere of control, and that's where Andrew was talking about, like our impact. It is something that's that's not necessarily going to be measured, but it's going to be estimated because it is a bit beyond our sphere of control and kind of our bandwidth to measure. When I talked about us being on our journey, we're in the process of figuring out what those counterfactuals might be. Now that we are now that we've gone from nonprofit to for-profit, we've gone from being technology, being focused on technology, strategic grants, and employee-inspired giving to just technology. Yeah, honestly, we're in the process of figuring out what those counterfactuals could be, and we probably will be engaging not only our internal staff, but also some external support as well to be able to help us to see the forest for the trees, working with some experts to be able to actually help us ground our work in a broader ecosystem. It's not necessarily to say that we wouldn't be able to do it, but I think our work is very much focused on Salesforce.org and what we're doing here, and sometimes it's just really good to get additional support to be able to help with that impact piece and what that measurement is. And so for us, we most likely would be looking external on a periodic basis, like every 5 to 10 years, to be able to actually get to that impact place. But also our outcomes we have designed as leading indicators for that impact. And so we use our outcomes to say, okay, well, if we're achieving these outcomes, if we're seeing these changes, then we should be on the right track to getting the impact that we want to see. So making sure that your outcomes are really aligned with that impact, impact statement is a really good start.
Thanks so much, Eric. We're at time here, so I apologize we didn't get around to your question. I want to thank all of my co-panelists here for answering all the questions. And I'd like to turn it over to Madeline now and our friends at NetHope to bring us home. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rakesh, and thanks to all of our panelists today. What a great and informative session. We had a really great audience interaction as well, so we appreciate your attendance and the time you took to come to our session today. So thank you again. Please take a moment to complete the webinar satisfaction poll. The link is in the chat window, and you'll see it pop up in a new window as you close out the Zoom session. And do look for the follow-up email that will contain a link to the recording for the session and other collateral. You can share that with your colleagues. Please share it far and wide. And again, thanks for attending and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.